Goe. Nin Deluisi, Holly Mathieson. I'm the music director of Symphony Nova Scotia, and I'm going to talk to you today about our concert this week, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It was written a year before he died and has been written about, analysed. In fact, it's credited by some as being the reason music analysis first came into existence. Reproduced, some would say over-reproduced, as a ubiquitous cultural icon. Translated from the original German into numerous foreign languages, appropriated as a political emblem, vehemently criticised on the one hand and totally idealised on the other since the day it was first played, and probably more than nearly any other piece of music ever written. Doesn't really feel like it needs an introduction, so this could be a really short pre-concert video. But maybe we can dig into it from a slightly different angle. Let's start with the melody from the fourth movement, sung by 4 soloists and choir, a setting of Schiller's Ode to Joy. Chances are, when I tell you we're playing this symphony, the first thing your ear recalls is this melody. But why is it so recognisable and memorable and almost universally loved? One reason is that the famous Ode to Joy is so singable. It's constructed mainly by stepwise movement, so requires very little vocal energy or technique. Any leaps without a breath or in the middle of a phrase go downwards, which humans find much easier. Beethoven writes it in simple time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We are bipedal, so it feels connected to our bodily movement. Even the phrases are even in frequency and duration. The melody is characterised by an upward trajectory at the start of each phrase, starting on the hopeful 3rd degree of the scale in the main phrase. It's like we begin the melody already looking up at the blue sky above us instead of on the ground. It covers a very small vocal range, making it easy to sing along. National anthems are often written this way. And it's constructed out of repeating melodic cells. You don't have to remember a whole tune, just about 3 little bits that are repeated several times. Because of this small-scaled, simple melodic construction, the whole thing could technically be harmonised with just 2 chords, the main ones in the tonal composer's arsenal. The tonic, which is like the home key, where things tend to begin and end, and the dominant, which is its main adversary, really closely linked to it and inexorably leads towards it, but definitely a separate tonal area. Actually, Beethoven uses a few more in his setting, but you could learn just 2 chords on a guitar or piano and accompany yourself very credibly. And then there's the text. Aspirational, hopeful, inspiring. Whether you hear it as religious or humanist, it's become a sort of cultural panacea, a musical flag for a humanity living in peace and harmony. The problem is, apart from a few veiled clues early on in the symphony, we don't hear that melody for the first 45 minutes. It's a really long time to wait. So here's your challenge. Can you sing anything from any of the earlier movements off the top of your head? Even I need to stop and think about it, which is strange, right? 45 minutes of music, more or less, depending how many cups of coffee the conductor has had that day, that our brain all but forgets the moment we hear that famous, simple, not particularly sophisticated tune. Those 3 earlier movements haven't gone to waste, though. Beethoven uses them to warm our ears up in preparation for the famous Ode to Joy. Let's look at the first movement. I'm not going to go into a really technical analysis of any of these movements. There are plenty of those online, and I figure if that's what you're into, you can probably do it yourself. There is, however, a sort of structural pragmatism in this movement. Symphonic first movements had a certain template they worked from at this point in history, called sonata form. Often a slow introduction that gives us a preview of the keys or tonal areas that we might visit over the symphony. Then the main meat of the movement is usually in a faster tempo and plays with 2 sections of music or themes, one in the home key and one in a key that is related but different enough to lend that section, the second theme, a distinctive feel. The composer states them in their respective keys, the home key and the other key, in a section called the exposition, sort of like laying out the chess pieces. Then there is a development section in which the composer starts at home again, in the home key, but goes on an extensive journey playing with the themes they've set out in the exposition. How far can I take them from their original keys? How much can I distort them? Beethoven, coincidentally, had stretched the development section further than any composer before him in his previous symphonies, so that you really had a feeling of being on a distant planet and totally disembodied or disconnected from home by the end of the development section. Then there is the recapitulation, the section where, like a really good stand-up comedian bringing all their material together in a mega joke at the end of their set, the composer takes the two themes from the exposition, everything they've learnt from pushing them around in the development, and plays them again, but this time they engineer it so that the second theme, which used to be in the contrasting key, is now in the home key, the tonic. It's like a taming or a tethering of the second theme. We like you, we know you exist, but don't take us away from our comfort zone this time. Finally, there will often be a coda section that doesn't go far at all. It reiterates, soothes and confirms, yep, we ended up back in our home key. Well done for keeping up on this journey. The power of one of these sonata form movements is the moment in the recapitulation and reinforced in the coda after the tonal meandering of the development section that we as listeners go, aha, I hear the home key. I can see my front door. We're home. It wasn't unheard of already at the time Beethoven wrote this symphony in the early 1820s that composers would toy with that structure, using compositional techniques to screw with their audience's expectations of how the structure would play out. But Beethoven takes that to whole new extremes here. The first movement of the symphony has a feeling of constantly searching with urgency and focus. This movement isn't about affirming the tonal areas of the symphony. It's more about scrying them out of nothing. From the very first phrase, which on its own sounds really stable harmonically, Beethoven is seeking, not stating, a tonal center. It makes the exposition, or first part of the movement, feel more like a development section. Just when we feel like he's situated us clearly in a tonal area and found a way to start the symphony, he springs back to the opening notes, but in a different key. Only we're so disoriented, even at this point, that we barely notice he's setting off from a different point. Our internal tonal compass is so disabled. It means that the exposition and development almost feel like one giant development section. We never got the laying out of the chess pieces in their two home positions, theme 1 and theme 2. And if we hope that the recapitulation will make us feel more secure, our hopes are dashed pretty quickly. The first theme comes back in the right key, but with a completely different feel. It isn't on a sure footing at all. The bass instruments play the wrong note of the chord, and the chord is voiced to sound like the dominant chord or the leading chord, separate from the tonal area. The atmosphere is aggressive and loud. It's like the theme has its back foot in the air mid-sprint and its fists are clenched, ready for a fight. And then the coda comes, and it's creepy, it's unsettling. He lands in the home key, D minor, well done Ludwig, but not with the material he's worked with, at least not in a way we recognize it. But it's sort of a terrifying, bleak death march. It's like the movement indeed brings us home, only to reveal to us that home is Darth Vader and the Death Star. So then he gives us the second movement. Really, this should be a third movement. It's an old-fashioned structural form, a scherzo and trio. As a conductor, these movements are usually the least satisfying to conduct in a symphony, not least because you spend most of the movement conducting in one, up and down like a yo-yo. And from a gestural point of view, that's the movement with the least expressive potential or capacity. We make music from belly button height and down. Anything above that, it's like you're skimming above the water or you've let go of the elastic somehow. And those sort of movements often leave us feeling like little more than human timekeepers. But happily, this movement has a lot more to it actually. The phrases are artfully shaped and ordered to build incredible momentum and drama. The movement has a pervasive feeling of nervous energy. It's jumpy and twitchy. It has a stepwise movement in the melodic material, similar to the Ode to Joy, which is a sort of precursor to that final theme. But this time it's grounded to the tonic, not starting on that hopeful third degree of the scale. The melody is also predominantly descending, where if you remember, the Ode to Joy is all looking upward. And in the second movement, it's mostly in the minor key. And it has ambiguous phrases that leave us feeling unsure when our left foot should step out with confidence. I suppose in contrast to the first movement, which battled over tonality, this one is very secure and predictable in that regard and pretty conventional in structure. But it's a sketch pad for melodic material. It's not in a form we'll recognize yet, just a great-great-grandparent many times over of the melody we'll hear in the fourth movement. But it's clearly the same DNA, and briefly manages to push itself into the major key and into the time signature or beat pattern that its great-grandchild will be in later in the evening. The third movement, a calm, explorative theme and variations, would normally sit as the second movement. It's much calmer in mood, more like the slow movement of one of his piano sonatas than his orchestral slow movements. It has a much wider and more melismatic vocal and harmonic range than any of the other melodies in the symphony. You've got to remember, Beethoven was not good at writing melodies. He's a structural composer. He deals with tectonic plates, not flowers. It's less reflective and expansive, and far less singable for the average listener. On the other hand, it doesn't challenge us remotely in terms of phrase structure, key, or formal architecture. There's a secure sense of comfort at the end. We don't feel any urge to find anything else or to go anywhere else. Beethoven has finally brought us home, hasn't he? Well, no, it's in B-flat major, where the earlier two movements are in D minor. But actually, he has taken us to B-flat major once already. The first movement's second theme was actually in B-flat major. It's sort of like the key he's been trying so hard to establish as the tonic or the home key, D minor, is petulant and stubborn and slippery. He can't make it stick. Whereas the secondary key, B-flat major, the one he should be able to discipline and push towards D minor in good sonata form, is so stable on its own that it's now starting to feel like he got them the wrong way around in the first place. Or put another way, it's like Beethoven is saying, I made two approaches to making D minor work in the first two movements, and I just couldn't tame it. I couldn't build a front door and a roof and four walls in D minor. So I'm going to abandon that building, and I'm going to build home in a key I'm finding much easier to deal with, B-flat major. It doesn't misbehave, it has no urge to run away to another key, and the melody is flowing onto the page like silk ribbon. Let's forget we ever discussed D minor. It was clearly a bad idea. I got the keys the wrong way around. So now for the homecoming, the fourth movement. Traditionally, a final movement wouldn't have too much tonal ambiguity. It would look back over the metaphorical musical journey of the first movements and emphatically declare and repeatedly restate where those movements had brought us. We started on Earth, spun around the moon, briefly visited Saturn, looked back at Earth from outer space to know where we were returning to, and now we're coming down the road towards our front door. All is well. Except we know that actually he started the symphony by starting at one address on Earth and then changing his mind a few minutes later and restarting from a different point on Google Maps without any warning. And then when he did finally find tonal and melodic resolution in the third movement, it was a different place again that had no desire whatsoever to go back to the first address. We would hope then that the fourth movement at least knows where it is, especially after the harmonically static slow movement. But the opening chord of the fourth movement is the apex of the symphony's tonal crisis. The two tonal areas he's been trying to scry out and solidify through those first three movements are slammed down on top of each other like car horns in a traffic jam, in what would have been a really discordant and shocking opening gesture at the time. And the material that follows does resolve to D minor, only to be abandoned immediately for a second car horn, this time in even less stable or familiar territory. He's panicking. He threads the episode of this orchestral panic attack together with an extraordinary double bass mini concerto. Almost speech-like utterances reminiscent of something from a Baroque opera? Are the double basses taking charge of the chaos and trying to steer Beethoven toward being a bit more sensible and predictable? A sort of musical, for goodness sake, stop messing about, we'll show you how it goes, Ludwig. Or maybe these double bass recitatives are a signal that we are venturing into the territory of a sacred oratorio. We're dealing with matters of the soul here. It's the only way we can resolve this crisis. Certainly, the inclusion of a choir and 4 soloists on stage with an orchestra would only ever have been seen in works like Bach and Handel's massive biblical works, the Passions, the Creation, or Beethoven's own sacred works, the Missa Solemnis and Christ on the Mount of Olives. So maybe we should be listening to the double basses as stand-ins for the bass vocal soloists in religious oratorios. Interestingly, Bach usually has the bass singing Jesus' words. Regardless, they sound stern and low and totally unsuited to teaching a choir and audience how a nice simple tune goes. It's a sort of unexpected and kind of underwhelming introduction to what will eventually become a blaze of transcendent euphoric mania later in the movement. And when we think back to what I said about the simple construction of this basic melody writing 101 tune, but now place it in the context of the complexity, chaos, and relentless working out of the first 45 minutes of music, we really start to feel that one of the emotions it evokes is just plain relief. I get it. It's straightforward. Don't worry, be happy, which strikes me as being a strikingly secular sentiment. And then once the theme is established, happily, Beethoven spends much of the movement hopping between sacred and secular musical worlds. 1 minute the orchestra and choir are playing medieval liturgical music, veiled in incense and echo, and the next we're flinging about in a wild earthly dance. Then the moment that Schiller's text brings us literally to the feet of God, gazing up in wide-eyed, almost fanatical awe, the euphoria is cut off by a farting contrabassoon that leads us into a march that feels very much of the earth and like it could be sung by drunk soldiers, one of whom, one of the soloists, literally sings off the page as if he has fallen off the table with frothing beer still in hand. So why is he blurring genres and bringing this sort of Christian symbolism into the secular symphonic form? To understand that, of course, we need to talk about the text. The Ode to Joy is a poem written by German poet Friedrich Schiller. The text references a paternal God, Christian or otherwise, pretty explicitly. Even the worm can feel contentment, and the cherub stands before God. Brothers, above the starry canopy there must dwell a living Father. World, do you know your Creator? Seek him in the heavens. Above the stars must he dwell. But the main theme is not actually religious piety or reverence, but joy as an unambiguously feminine force allied to Mother Earth. Joy, bright spark of divinity, daughter of Elysium, fire-inspired we enter into thy sanctuary. Thy magic power reunites all that custom has divided. Note that it's magic, not sacred power. All creatures drink of joy at nature's breast. Just and unjust alike taste of her gift. She gave us kisses and the fruit of the vine, a tried friend to the end. But hang on, this seems to be as much an anthem for humanism or procreation or hiking or keg parties as it is for fraternal unity. The only reference to unity is in the first stanza. Joy's magic power reunites all that custom has divided. All men become brothers under the sway of thy gentle wings. But, and here's the really awkward bit, the text is also exclusionary. This might be a utopian brotherhood, but gender specificity aside, Schiller spells out the people who aren't included in it. The lonely, the introverted, essentially those whose values don't match those of the party. And accordingly, it's been adopted by both dictatorships and democracies as a musico-political mission statement. Beethoven's most recent biographer, Jan Swafford, says, how one viewed the ninth depended on what kind of Elysium one had in mind, whether all people should be brothers or that all non-brothers should be exterminated. The text is a refraction of our political selves. I think every time we choose to program something that is so historicised and as popular and easily accessed as Beethoven 9, we have to justify why we're bringing it to the stage yet again. It's lazy to program it just because we know you like it and it'll sell tickets. There are many plausible ways to justify playing this piece, actually, so that's not a difficult task. It's incredible music apart from anything else. But I thought this time we might listen to it together with a view to really hearing the text, and not just heading home at the end of the evening carrying a surface level, feel-good translation and whistleable tune in our minds. To help me in that task, I asked our symphony chorus director, Jorell Tranquilla, to choose an unaccompanied choral piece for the first part of the concert. He suggested Just Society by Métis composer Patrick Carabray, whose work explores themes of identity, community, and decolonisation. Just Society draws inspiration from the Syrian refugee crisis, using historical and political texts and audio samples to layer and contrast altruistic and realistic perspectives on social justice. It's a piece about good intentions, about political utopias and political agendas, about compromised pledges and unearned self-congratulations, and about genuine hope for the potential of humanity. It also has structural similarities to Beethoven's Ninth, including finishing with an anthemic melody calling on the audience to join in and sing in solidarity with their neighbour. Sound familiar? I've asked our new symphony chorus director, Jorell Tranquilla, to join me to talk about this programming decision. Jorell, how is it working on these two very different pieces that are sort of like holding up two shards of the mirror on the same object from two different perspectives?
It's a really great opportunity for this chorus because we often are immersed in just one large work. And of course, the chorus doesn't sing a whole lot in this important work. They play a very important role in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, but otherwise they're sitting around waiting rather a long time. And so I was really delighted that we were invited to participate with this secondary work. I think that these two pieces are really in dialogue with one another in an interesting way, and I don't believe that they've ever been programmed together, but the composer of Just Society, Pat Carabray, was really delighted that they could be paired in this way. I think that musically, they're also very contrasting in a really delightful way. We have a coming together of a variety of texts, Latin text, and then a French text from Louis Riel, with sort of this English, almost anthem, like a national anthem kind of a text, which is really meant to be this sort of call to unity, but with very much with the idea that we've not reached that, and so that reflects back on the Schiller text in I think a beautiful way, because Beethoven was selecting these lines from Schiller's ode very much and curating it in such a way, very much sort of recognizing that in his own time, that there was this conflict very much with the idea of the Enlightenment and wanting to sort of elevate sort of the coming together, the cosmopolitan nature of Europe coming out of the 18th century was very much at odds with this growing sense of nationalism. And I think that these two pieces really do connect in a fascinating way.
This is your second year working with our chorus, and I know they've done Beethoven 9 many times over the years. Is this, am I right, it's your second year, or is it your first year?
Well, second calendar year, but I just started in the fall, so this is my second project with the symphony chorus.
So the end of your first season, then, let's put it that way.
That's right.
Have you yourself done the Beethoven before?
Many times, and I was reflecting on my first experience with this work. I traveled with the American Boy Choir when I was very young, when I was a boy soprano, and we were able to perform this work. We joined together with, I believe, the Westminster Choir College ensemble, but we bolstered the soprano section and performed with Zubin Mehta conducting the Israel Philharmonic at Avery Fisher Hall, and that was my first experience actually singing with with an orchestra, and a pretty incredible first experience with that. And as a very young singer, I was only a little bit aware of where I was and what was going on, but it was a pretty remarkable experience. Throughout grad school and over the course of the last 15 years or so, I've prepared it a handful of times for other conductors, and yeah, it's a challenge because it sits very high in the register for everyone, but especially for the sopranos. And it's quite compact. And as I mentioned, the chorus doesn't have a lot to sing, but it's taxing, and it's exciting though, because it's a familiar work. It's certainly the Ode to Joy tune is a part of kind of the just, if there's an awareness of Western classical music, this is one of those tunes that is certainly familiar. So it's really it's a joy to sing it and to perform it, and our chorus is loving loving that familiarity, especially with a work that was brand new to them, Just Society.
I really find this brilliant. You have far more experience with the piece than me. I was supposed to conduct it a few months ago, but I suspect I had COVID, so I had to take the time off. I was quite unwell. But the only other experience I think I have of it was I did it at the end of a day of all 9 Beethoven symphonies, 3 conductors, so we did 3 each, in a sort of a charitable Beethoven marathon, raising money for Médecins Sans Frontières. And we had just players from all over London, UK, coming in and playing as they wanted, and they could just sit out for a symphony if they were tired, or just come and do one and then leave. But we had 2 people who played for the whole 9 symphonies, one of whom was also helping me organise the day, and she stood up at the end of the 9th and fainted. And an incredible man who played principal viola all the way through and then stood up and sang the bass solo. He also had terrible health many years later. He's back on the mend now, but I sort of feel some responsibility for that. But it was the most surreal kind of survivalist version of Beethoven 9. I'm interested to let our audiences know, will the choir be singing in English or German?
Auf Deutsch, we're singing it in German, and certainly it exists in the ether, and it transcends culture and nationality and language. And there's a wonderful documentary about the Ninth Symphony, which really discusses the way in which this music has been a rallying call for so many different social, political sort of protest movements, particularly in the 20th century. But it was fascinating through that documentary to hear this work sung in many, many different languages. And of course, many people associate it with a Christian hymn text that is not a translation of the Schiller specifically, but it exists sort of in so many different ways. But yes, singing it in the German, which presents lots of challenges, but also I think allows it to achieve a lot of the drama that certainly Beethoven, if he had been able to hear it, would have expected, and would have appreciated.
Tell us a little bit about what we can expect from Just Society, our concert opener.
So this is a work by the Vancouver-based Métis composer Pat Carbray. I came across this piece of music and became familiar with some of Pat's music during my time on the West Coast, and saw this performed with the Vancouver Chamber Choir, which every year puts together a program where they invite quartets of college and university students to participate and sing with them on several substantive works. And the university I worked at had a close working relationship with the Vancouver Chamber Choir, so we always participated in this event, and so I was able to prepare this work with my students, and so got to know it a bit then. What audiences can maybe expect is that this will sound quite different in many regards, because it employs audio cues and has that sort of mixed media component. This is not anything that is brand new, but it certainly does have a very contemporary sound. It will incorporate contemporary or 30 or 40-year-old political speeches from Canadian politicians, and some that are more recent, but sort of modulated and sort of transformed through these audio cues. So in some places, the composer's intention is for what the chorus is singing to actually be almost blurred by those audio cues. It's really a fascinating sound. However, the music that the chorus sings is very accessible harmonically. For the most part, it's very recognizable, and so it's that other element that will be a bit of a surprise. But I think also in a delightful way, because the Beethoven exists in this contemporary space, and we also put it on a pedestal, and it exists in this historical context. Hope it will allow us to then kind of recontextualize the Beethoven in some way. It just will put us in a little bit of a different headspace. But it is not in any way attempting to express a partisan sort of political statement. I don't think it's not the composer's intention. But it will certainly be, yeah, a sort of marriage of the familiar and the unexpected in this work. The texts, as I said, there are texts in English and in French, and text in Latin from Cicero, but the French text specifically comes from writings by Louis Riel. Who many will of course know was sort of is now claimed as sort of the founder of Manitoba. But this writing occurs when he is in exile in the United States, and he will return to Canada, and he will be brought into conflict with the Canadian military, and will be tried and executed, and it's a complicated part of our history. But this text and introducing Louis Riel as a Métis leader from the 19th century is an important one for Pat, our composer here, to highlight, I think. And it also references the idea that we are to strive to be a just society. That's not the society that Louis Riel encountered when he returned from exile. And we certainly have a lot of work to do today. But that's one of the statements that the work is certainly making, as is Beethoven, as we call for alle Brüder werden, alle Menschen werden Brüder, that all people would be as brothers.
That's brilliant. I'm really excited to hear Carabray's piece. Thank you so much, Joel, for joining me. I'm really looking forward to seeing you on stage.
Thanks so much, Holly.
So I hope this week's concerts offer, amongst many other things, a moment of reflection on Schiller's text, with all of its ambiguity, naivety, complexity, and even its less than harmonious resonances. What do these words actually signify? To us, as a city, as individuals, as treaty people in Mi'kma'ki, as daily observers of horrific violent atrocities and proxy wars, and as welcomers of refugees from various parts of the globe due to war, climate change, human trafficking, discrimination. To whom do we extend the hand of brotherhood or sisterhood? What are the conscious and subconscious caveats that hold us back from extending that hand in other situations? And most importantly, how does Beethoven use this incredible symphonic writing to try to play that argument out for us, or maybe to try and resolve it for himself? My reading of it, in that framing, is that for all the sentimental and slightly naive optimism of Schiller's text, the uncomfortable message that I'm left with in the silence afterwards is, it's really not that simple. Oh, and in case you're wondering how Beethoven's personal crisis about the tonality resolves, he splits the difference. Instead of D minor or B flat major, that famous melody is in D major. He had the right building plot all along. He'd just forgotten to build a house facing the sun. I want to say a huge thank you to TD Bank Group for supporting this concert. And a thank you to everyone who has joined us this season for an incredible year of music making, celebrating our 40th anniversary. It's been great to make music with you.